Conversations with Great Minds. I'm joined by Candida Moss. Candida is the professor of New Testament and early Christianity at the University of Notre Dame and an expert in the role of martyrdom in Christian theology. A renowned scholar in her field of study, she's received recognition for her research from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the John Templeton Foundation. Her new book, The Myth of Persecution: How Early Christians Invented a Story of Martyrdom, reveals the truth behind centuries of Christian persecution stories, and is a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the mindset of America's religious right. Candida, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Was there an element of truth to that? I mean, the stories are pretty pervasive. You know, Stephen being having his skin stripped off him, John being crucified upside down, or Peter. I've mixed it all up now in my brain over the years, but you know, we've all heard every single one of the original apostles. There's some sort of horrific martyrdom story associated with them.
Yeah. That's interesting. You know, we have all of these stories, thousands of stories, in fact, but these stories come from decades, centuries, sometimes even a millennium after the events that they supposedly describe, and they've been written by people who weren't present at those events. They've been embellished. So the story about Peter, he was crucified upside down, we're told, because he thought he was unworthy to die like Jesus. It's a great story. Now, the story itself can be dated to the earliest in the 2nd century. But he doesn't say he's unworthy to die like Jesus. He gives a whole other explanation. And so
what's that explanation?
Well, he says that sin has turned the world on its head, and so by dying upside down, it's a symbol of how Christ comes to invert this. It's very theological.
Yeah, this is a story being told 5 generations after he's dead.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe as long as 100 years after he died, by someone who never met Peter, much less, you know, watched him die. And there are other elements of the story that sound a lot like ancient romance novels. So Peter has this kind of magical Harry Potter style duel with the flying magician. He resurrects
Seriously?
Yes. He resurrects a smoked fish. There are sort of talking animals. Now, in the story, the reason why Peter ends up dying is because he persuades the wives and concubines of Roman officials to stop having sex with these Roman officials. So they're understandably annoyed, and they call for Peter to be sort of put on trial, and he dies on charges of atheism. He doesn't die because he's a Christian and they hate Christianity.
Welcome back to Conversations with Great Minds. I'm speaking with Candida Moss, theologian, professor, and author of the book, The Myth of Persecution: How Early Christians Invented a Story of Martyrdom. It's an extraordinary work, an extraordinary book. Thank you for writing it. How does the myth of first of all, I think you've largely established that, with the exception of a couple of years, there was one emperor that you talked about. Was it Dionysius?
Diocletian.
Diocletian. Yeah. With the exception of that one period for a couple of years, by and large, Christians were not the victims of intense persecution in the early church. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's 2 years between 303 and 305 when the Emperor Diocletian institutes laws that really correspond to what we imagine when we think about persecution. You know, Christians being forced to sacrifice, sort of being hunted down, that the Romans were really going to make sure that they got them. But apart from that brief 2-year period, we really don't see anything much like the modern conception of persecution. Sometimes Christians died as a result of legislation that wasn't designed to target them.
But just anti-revolutionary or anti-religious?
Well, so there's an emperor called Decius, and he passed a decree that was supposed to revivify something called the Roman imperial cult. The Roman imperial cult, it stabilized the empire. It protected them from attack. It unified them. And it wasn't a religious innovation. It was much more like a pledge of allegiance.
Was this kind of a variation on Blut und Erde, the concept that Hitler was promoting? We are of this soil, we are of this race, we are therefore this nation?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that, although I'm sort of loath to bring in any comparisons to Hitler.
Yeah, it's whoever, yeah.
But what's interesting is Christian historians told us that this legislation was designed to target Christians. It was anti-Christian legislation, and it was wicked. And then we discovered archaeological evidence that, in fact, it was just general legislation. It wasn't about the Christians. And the difference between general legislation that you don't like or you feel you can't act in accordance with, and persecution that's designed to get you. There's a difference between those things that we have to acknowledge and respect.
Yeah, it seems like a significant difference.
It is.
So if there was really in the first 300 years of the church, before the church became the state to a large extent, and held that ground until what, the Italian Revolution of the late 19th century, early 20th century. I mean, the Catholics ruled much of Europe, most of Europe. If that persecution didn't happen, why is that story so pervasive now? We touched on this earlier, but how does it get continually re-nurtured, and why?
Right, well, there are a couple of reasons. Before Jesus, persecution was not a badge of honor. It was a sign that your deity was angry, was punishing you, was impotent, couldn't support you.
Well, this is the Old Testament notion.
Right.
The good God tells Joshua, go to the city of Ai, kill everybody, cut open their stomachs. But
right. And most everyone in the ancient world would have agreed, if you're being persecuted, you do not have divine support.
Right.
With Christianity, with Jesus dying on the cross, persecution, suffering, martyrdom, these now become sort of badges of honor. You're now like Jesus. So persecution sort of gets hardwired into the Christian psyche. Now, the reason that it stayed was because it's tremendously powerful rhetoric. So you could say at first, well, the Romans are persecuting us. But then with the rise of the Christian Empire, Christians maintained the idea that basically the world is polarized. It's us against them. And we're under attack, and we're the good guys. Except the people who are attacking us are now not the Romans, but say, the Ottoman Empire or heretics in the church are attacking us just like the Romans. And once you make that claim, you can legitimate any kind of violence against those groups because you're on the defensive.
Right.
You're the one who's persecuted, and obviously you have to defend yourself. This is why persecution rhetoric is so effective.
This is. I lived in Germany for a year, and we lived in rural, way out in the middle of nowhere. There were all these little castles around, and I got in some fascinating conversations with a few real scholars of this who said, basically, for 500, 1,000 years, you would have Castle A and Castle B would have these multi-generational wars where the kings would keep the wars going because it would cause all the peasants to maintain their loyalty to the king. If the other guys are out to get us, and the two kings are good buddies, but nobody really knows it. Is that that's the psychology of this?
The psychology of it is that this kind of persecution complex allows your group to really band together. It brings about social unity. But the persecution language has always served a very positive function for at least church institutions.
This is Brett Strong. Are you surprised that Peter died for atheism and not for Jesus or Christianity or Christ? Also, as you can see, Christianity is a fabricated religion. Whether it be the Christian God or a superhero son, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, hell, ghosts, devils. The Christianity in the Bible is fabricated. It's invented. It's made up. It's fiction. Yeah, in the Bible, Jerusalem, the city Jerusalem is real. The Middle East is real, obviously. But these characters of the Bible, these main characters of the Bible, the Christian God, his superhero son Jesus, the Holy Spirit, hell, ghosts, devils, demons, whatever, it's all fabricated. And just like martyrdom, it's fabricated. Only a few died for martyrdom. Only a few. That's it. You heard the expert. It's all fabricated. The church fabricated these martyrdom stories for Jesus. They fabricated it to bolster their own position as being, clergy members. See, like, this is real. Look at the martyrdom that's gone on. This is how real it is that Christians are getting martyrdom by the boatload. This is real. Follow us. Make me your leader. Obey me. I will be per se your God. That's what's going on, folks. It's fabricated. The clergy members fabricated all this martyrdom in Christianity to bolster their own position, to keep themselves in power, to have more power, to have people fall under their leadership, to make them as gods. Christianity, folks, is a fabricated religion. Let's talk a little bit more about fabricated martyrdom. This is from Kenneth Humphrey's website, JesusNeverExisted.com. Now, this is a quote from Origen of Alexandria, 184 to 254 AD. This is a quote of Origen of Alexandria. A few engaged in a struggle for their religion, and these individuals who can easily be numbered have endured death for the sake of Christianity. Let me read it over again. A few engaged in a struggle for their religion, and these individuals who can be easily numbered have endured death for the sake of Christianity. Now that's Origen of Alexandria, 184 AD, writing from, he lived from 184 AD to 254 AD. Even he said back then, in the 2nd century, that there's only a handful of people who have been martyred for Jesus, Christianity. Only a handful. Wow. You see, Christianity is a fabricated religion, from the Christian God to his superhero son Jesus, the Holy Spirit, hell, ghosts, demons, devils, and now, attack on martyrdom. It's all fabricated. Christianity is a fake, false religion, made up out of thin air, people's minds.